Okay, we're going to do some of this test review. So I'm just going to kind of hop around. It might seem a little random, but I'm going to try to get through the big ones without doing all of this. So here's a graph. We're going to look at where it's increasing, decreasing, and constant. Remember, the next questions are going to ask me about decreasing and constant in a second. Remember that we use X values for these, and it's kind of best to look at all of it and then kind of go back and forth afterwards. So this is decreasing first, then it's constant, and then it's increasing. So it's increasing right here, and we use the X values. So that's from 4 to infinity, and we always use open symbols for increasing and decreasing. So don't use a square bracket because you're only going to have one chance on the test. It's always the open. So 4 to infinity parentheses. They're asking for the constant. The constant is that middle range, which is from here, -4 to 4. Again, always use the open parentheses. And then the decreasing X value starts at the left, negative infinity, stops at -4, open parentheses. So open parentheses on all of those. Okay, so 2 is very similar. I'm not going to do that one. We can actually write it out if you want here. Number 3, list the intervals where it's increasing. Okay, and so it's increasing here, decreasing, constant, increasing, constant. So you'll be taking this on paper. You can mark it up that way. But there are 2 places where it's increasing, and we're going to use the X values. So it's all the way starting increasing from negative infinity. And then it stops at this X value right here where my cursor is, which is -7. And it's always parentheses, and now it's going to increase again. So you can use a comma, but we were using the U, and it would take it. Oh, sad. That's not what I wanted to click. Okay, so now another parenthesis. Where is it increasing? The next place, it's at -2 because we're using the X values to -1. Always the X values. It's hard to keep doing that sometimes. Okay. Now they want the decreasing, and that's only this one piece here. So it picked up at the -7, and then it went to the -5, parentheses everywhere. It's always small number to big number. Don't forget that as well, and always the X values. And it's only decreasing in the one place. And then the constant is here from -5 to -2. And do the union again because it's going to be constant again here at -1 for the rest of the graph. So that would be -1 to infinity. The big things here are to use the X values, parentheses everywhere. Okay, we'll skip this one and we'll go to number 5. We're going to graph the function and tell where it's increasing, decreasing, and find any relative maximum. You can type this in your calculator, but it's going to be a frowny face absolute value sign because of the minus there, and it's going to be upshifted 7. But you're going to ask me, so I will show you. It'll be y equals, clear this out, 7 minus, if you hit the math button, if you go over to number here, number 1 is absolute value. You can type the X in there, and you can take a look at the graph. That is a bad zoom, so let me fix my zoom up, zoom 6. Okay, so there's the graph. So it's up 7, like I said, and it will be a V-shaped graph. I don't know. So up 7. It's a regular slope, so just over 1, down 1. That's the graph. Okay, so then where is it increasing? Well, it's increasing on this left all the way to the X value of 0. So it's negative infinity to 0. Then it's decreasing, so I'm done with that. It's decreasing from 0 to infinity. I will say that students sometimes want to accidentally switch to the y values, but on increasing and decreasing, it always has to be the x. And now they're going to ask you for the maximum point or relative max. It is actually an absolute. Make sure you do it the correct way. So this is going to be the y value and then the x value here. The maximum is at 7, and that happens when x equals 0. So 0, 7. And there's not a minimum because it goes down forever. Okay. I'm not going to do this problem. I'm going to explain to you what this means. They want you to type this in your calculator. This is a graphing calculator problem. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and do this problem. Okay. So I have to write it down so that I can copy it in a second when I switch screens. So the equation is y equals negative x to the third plus 6x squared minus 9x minus 10. Now, what this is telling me is it's telling me my x min and my x max, we're going to change our window from -3 to 7, and then the y min and the y max will be -20 to 15. That's what this is explaining to me. So I'm going to type this into my calculator. So negative x to the third plus 6x squared minus 9x minus 10. Okay, now to put the window in, I'll hit this window button. And my x min is, like I said, -3. And then I have a 7. Keep that 1 there. And -20 to 15. Okay, so I'm going to look at a parabola or a cubic, little S cube baby. Okay, so that's what I'm looking at. Let's go back to see what they want me to do next. Where is it decreasing? Well, if I look at my graph, it's decreasing. Where's my pen? Here to this point, and then it starts increasing, and then it's decreasing again from here on. So it's decreasing here and it's decreasing here, and I need the x values. Now it looks like I know what the values are, and you probably can estimate, but if I really want to find an exact value, what I will do is I'll do second calculate. Minimum here is number 3. It asks me for a left bound, so I'll hit that left arrow until I'm on the left side. I'll hit the right arrow until I'm on the right side. I'll hit enter one more time for my guess. And sure enough, this point is exactly at 1. I'm going to disregard those zeros, and it's a 1, -14. And then I'll need to know what this point is as well. So now it's not a minimum anymore. This time I'm looking for a maximum value. I'm already on the left of it, so that's fine. I have to go to the right because I have to tell that calculator where to find the point and guess here in the middle. And we're going to change that to a 3, -10. Okay? So what you're going to be doing is when they're asking you where it is increasing, it was increasing just right in that little middle range. And we're only using x values. And be careful because they put those y values there as well. Only use the x values, and we're increasing just from 1 to 3. The decreasing happened first, and that was -infinity to 1. And then again from 3 to infinity. Be really careful not to use those y values. Where was the relative max? The relative max was right here. We got that from second calculate maximum. X equals 3. And the maximum value was -10 there. And there was a minimum on this one. That minimum was x equals 1. And we're going to use the y value in the first spot of -14. Okay. Here is some word problems. So we'll go ahead and do these. You have a landscaping company that has 60 meters of fencing, and it's going to be a rectangular garden. The garden is X meters long. What will the area be? Well, if this is X and this is X, this is the part that's kind of tricky. I have 60 meters total to use, all of it. But if I cut it right here, I'm going to use 30 meters on this side, and I'm going to use 30 meters on this side, right? So what I'm going to use here is 30 minus X. Okay, why is it not 60? Because I'm going to use the other 30 here. If you wanted to use 60, you would have had to do 60 minus both of the X's and divide it by 2, because you would have had to use the rest of it here. So because it's a rectangle and this is X, it's going to be 30 minus X. Area is base times height. So it's X times 30 minus X, which is 30X minus X squared. So it's 30X minus X squared. Okay, this one, they're giving me a little right triangle here. So what they're going to be using is Pythagorean theorem. They want us to find D. So you're going to take the 250 squared plus the 150t squared, and that is the distance squared. Then you will square root both sides. So it's the one that looks like this, 250 squared plus 150. I should have done parentheses. That's what I should have done. See, here they didn't do the parentheses, but the whole thing has to be squared. So that was Mrs. Bruno's mistake. You definitely will need the parentheses on that one. Okay, make sure you go back over those right before you take that test. Okay, let's look at these values for piecewise. Okay, g of -9 means x is -9. So I had to figure out which rule it's going to be. -9 is less than 2, so it's going to go in that top rule. -9 plus 9 is 0. Plug in 2. I'm going to use the top rule again because 2 is equal to 2, and that will be 2 plus 9, and that will give me 11. If it's 7, that's greater than 2, and 8 minus 7 is 1. Okay, I'm not going to do this one. That's very similar. Okay, let's talk about graphs now. So on these graphs, remember, you're going to look here and say, what am I dealing with? I'm dealing with a positive slope line. Then I'm going to look at a constant line at 0, and then another positive slope line. So everything has to be going uphill. So because this has a negative slope line, C and D are out. Now I'm going to be looking at my endpoints. And the best thing to do here is to realize that the first graph is going to have a solid dot line. And my first graph does have a solid dot line here, but this one, it has an open circle. So I already know my answer is A. If you didn't look at the first one, you could have done the second one as well. 0 is going to have an open, open. And you can see that 0 has the open, open on A as well. So you're just kind of looking for what it's not. And that's going to be the best way to find those piecewise graphs. Okay, that one's very similar. Okay, let's look at this domain question. So domain is what x is allowed to be here. And for this graph, I definitely am going to the left forever, and I'm going to the right forever. But what's happening here? I got to make sure. Does x ever equal 1? And even though it doesn't equal 1 here or here, it does right there at that solid dot. So all the values are accounted for, and the domain is left to right forever, which is negative infinity to positive infinity. Right? So what will the range be? Well, the range here is funny because I'm not going down forever or up forever. I'm really only allowed to be 3 different things here. So really the y values are only going to be -4, 1 or 2. And that's really weird looking, but the only things that are allowed to be are those three numbers. Okay, and what would the equation be? Well, the first graph is definitely -4. Y equals -4. So this one has out in the middle. B is out. And then the second graph is just this dot. And what does it equal? It actually equals 2. That second dot is when x equals 1, y is equal to 2, and that's choice C. All right, this one's very similar. All right, so let's talk about some equations for lines. We want an equation of a line that passes through this point and is perpendicular to 7x plus 5y equals 9. So some of you will have to remember this. Perpendicular is not the same slope, but it's a way of telling me that the slope is the opposite slope and the flip, the reciprocal, if you flip it over. So this is a way of telling me the slope, and this is telling me a point. So to find the slope, I'm actually going to have to get y all by itself. So I'll divide everybody by my number here. And the slope they give me is not -7/5. But that, oh, what did I put? That is not what I'm after. I need the perpendicular slope. So I'm going to change the sign and make it positive and flip it upside down. So the slope I need is this 5/7. Okay, so that's going to be the first thing I can type in there will be 5/7 x. Now I have to find the y-intercept. So we're going to use y equals mx plus b. And we're going to use this point they give me for x and y. So -7 is m, which would be 5/7, times x, which is 3, plus b. So that's -7. You can type that in your calculator and hit math 1. It's going to tell you 15/7 plus b. I just multiplied the tops and multiplied the bottoms. If I subtract 15/7 from both sides, I am going to go to my calculator now. So I'm going to take -7 -7 minus 15 divided by 7. And I enter, and it'll give me the decimal. I'm going to hit math 1, changes it to a fraction for me, and it's -64/7. So -64/7 is what my B is going to be. Okay, and it is not a nice equation, really. So it kind of feels like you're doing something wrong. And that's what I get. Now, you also just want to mention you could have not done the y equals mx plus b there. And I'm sure the math lab, actually, if you would have hit view an example, would have not done mx plus b, but most of you told me that's what you preferred. You could have done y minus y1 is mx minus x1. That would have been a y plus 7 equals an m, which is the 5/7, x minus 3. And then you could have cleaned it up from there and you will get the same answer. So that's another option for you. Okay, that was a perpendicular one. This one I'm going to have you skip. Okay, so you're going to be able to skip question 16. I don't need you to do question 16, and maybe somebody will post that in classroom if they catch it. But if not, don't do 16. Sure. Okay, 17. They wrote FG -1/6. When they're written like that, that means multiply. So we're going to take f of -1/6 times g of -1/6. And when you do f of -1/6, it's not very nice. -1/6 squared minus 19 is 1 over 36 minus 19. And I could type that in my calculator, but I'm just going to wait a second. Because when I do g of negative 1/6, I get 6 times negative 1/6 plus 1. Those sixes cancel and I get negative 1 plus 1, which is 0. And if I take some number times 0, guess what I get? 0. So the answer to this one is going to be 0. Okay, we're going to skip this one and go to number 19. Okay, in question 19, they want g divided by h of 5. That's the same thing as g of 5 divided by h of 5. So I'm going to go ahead and do g of 5 here. That's the square root of 5 minus 5, which is just 0. 0 divided by 6 does exist. Your calculator can do it. 0 divided by 6 is 0. Yeah, this one's pretty similar, so we'll go to the next one. And these are the big pointers, okay? So we're going to go ahead. I think there's probably 2 of them. Nope, just 1. Okay, this one's actually even a little bit harder than the one that was on your quiz. So this is going to be worth lots of points. You're going to want to do this more than one time on your review. And I would do it the day before you take the test as well. Because this time it's not negative infinity, positive infinity for all those ones at the beginning, because there's risk factors off the get-go. So the domain of f, well, I have 7 over x minus 3. What is the rule? The rule is you cannot divide by 0. So x minus 3 cannot equal 0. So because of that, if I add 3 to both sides, x cannot equal 3. And that is the domain of f. So what can f be? Be negative infinity. It'll go to 3. We'll jump over 3. So we'll put the union. And then it will go to infinity. Okay. Now, the function of g also has a domain issue because I have the square root of x minus 1. And remember, on these guys, those can't be negative. It can, though, be 0. So x minus 1 has to be greater than equal to 0. If you add 1, you get x is bigger than or equal to 1. So what is your domain here? Well, your graph can be 1, and I'm going to use a square bracket there. Can be 1, and it can be anything bigger than 1, which is to infinity. Getting these first 2 right is going to be essential for you to get all the rest of them right as well. So you really need to make sure you can get those first 2 right. Now they want to know what happens if you multiply f times g. Well, if you multiply them both, and they're going to ask me for that answer in a minute, basically, both of these are going to go together. This is going to be what happens with both of those rules. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 7 over x minus 3 times the square root of x minus 1. I can put this over 1, and then it just becomes multiplying fractions. You multiply the tops, you keep them on top. You multiply the bottoms, and you keep it on bottom. So you get 7 square root of x minus 1 over x minus 3. That's the answer, and they're going to ask me that down below here. But this is important because if you look at the equation, it has both of those problems in one equation. So I have to write both of the domains here. So what will that look like? Well, if it's 1 is where this one starts, so that's where this is going to have to start. I cannot plug 0 in because I can't plug 0 in the top. So basically what's going to happen here now is I'm going to start at 1. Okay, and then I'm going to go to 3 because that's where this one says I can go. But I'm going to then jump over the 3 and continue for infinity. So basically what this domain is saying, it says if I'm going to do both of them together, it's saying, so x is bigger than or equal to 1, but not 3, because not 3 came from this. So this is saying both of those together. That's tricky. You are going to have to practice this quite a few times. Okay, how about f times f? Well, f times f would just be this guy twice, right? So then that's just 7 over x minus 3 times 7 over x minus 3, which is the same thing as 7 over x minus 3 squared. I think it might let us write it like that if I can remember. But regardless, if I have to double distribute that, I'll do that in a minute. Only one of the risk factors show up, and it's the exact same as the one was with f, right? So this is going to be the exact same as f. So negative infinity to 3 union 3 to infinity. And if you guys are smart on test day, you'll remind me, and maybe we can do this question right before you take the test as a quick review example. Okay, so now the domain of f over g. Well, what does that do? Well, that's going to put them both into play, okay? So I'm going to take 7 over x minus 3. If I divide by g, I'm really multiplying by 1 over g. That's the same thing, right? So what this equation looks like is really weird. It looks like this, 7, and then it has an x minus 3, and then you're just multiplying it by the square root of x minus 1. So definitely it's going to be both again, but this one is a little bit different than the both that was here. Because what's different here is now, because the square root is in the bottom, this can't be 0 either. So it can't be negative or 0. So because of that, I'm not going to have a square bracket. I'm going to have the exact same as the both, but instead of a square bracket, I'm going to have an open parenthesis, because now all of a sudden it's in the bottom and 1 is not allowed. So it's going to go 1 to 3 and 3 to infinity. This time we couldn't have the square bracket because since 1 is in the bottom, that doesn't work anymore. Okay, now g over f would just be this guy flipped upside down. So if you flip this guy upside down, now this is on the top and you're dividing by 7. So now that x minus 1 can be 0 again. So now it's the exact same as the multiplying one. And you do get the square bracket again because it's on top, which is not the problem. It's only a problem when it's on the bottom. Okay, now they're going to ask us for all these questions that I already did. Okay, so f times g, remember, if you multiply them both, you put the 7 times this over the x minus 3. So it's going to be a fraction. I already did this. So now it's just about typing it in. 7 square root x minus 1. And then down below is the x minus 3. Actually, the multiplying stuff on this one is easier than the first quiz. The domain is what's harder on this one. All right, f times f, you would multiply the tops, keep them on top, multiply the bottoms, keep them on bottom. So I'd have to take the 7 times 7, which is 49. Don't type this in until I try it out. I think I can just write x minus 3 quantity squared here. Let's see. They'll let you just write it like this. You don't have to do x squared minus 6x plus 9. If you do that on the test, so that's fine. Whatever you do, don't tell me that's x squared plus 9 because that's wrong. Okay, f over g we also did. Just a quick reminder. F over g is the same thing as f divided by g, which is f times 1 over the g. So what I'm going to write here is a really weird looking fraction. So 7 goes on top, and then on bottom, I guess I'm going to do some parentheses here. Let's see, x minus 3, and then I'm going to do the square root x minus 1. Let's see if it takes that. That looks okay, I think. Okay, yep, that works. And then for g over f, you're just going to flip it over because you're going to take the x minus 1 this time, And you're going to take it times the inverse, which is x minus 3 over 7, which just flips everything upside down. Okay. So that was a doozy. I'm going to actually stop the video here because I think people want to come back to this video, and that way this will be the last question on it. People can find it pretty easily.